All right, diving in today into the world of First Nations leadership styles, specifically in Australia. We've got some academic readings to guide us here, and this is going to be great if you're, maybe prepping for a meeting or you're working on a project with some First Nations communities, or hey, even if you're just curious about different leadership approaches.
And it's such a rich topic. A good place to start, I think, is acknowledging that First Nations is sort of, an umbrella term meant to be respectful, but not overlooking the fact that, there's distinct cultures and histories of so many different Indigenous groups all across Australia.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like it's kind of like saying European
Yeah.
gives you the continent, but not like
Hmm.
the individual countries, right?
Yeah.
So before we dive into like what First Nations leadership looks like, today, how far back do these leadership traditions actually go?
Millennia, literally. We're talking practices that have been honed over tens of thousands of years, long before a lot of the Western concepts that, we might default to.
Wow, that's incredible. So like if I'm picturing, I don't know, a CEO in a boardroom,
Hmm.
that's probably not the right image here.
Not quite. Western leadership often focuses a lot on titles and hierarchy, but First Nations leadership is, well, it's way more holistic, It's about the well-being of the entire community, how people connect with each other, with the land, even with the spiritual realm. It's
Mm.
the Australian Indigenous Governance Institute describes it as having all these like interwoven dimensions. You've got shared responsibility, roles of gender and knowledge, kinship ties, reputation in the community. It's complex. It's fascinating.
Okay, so less about like individual power, more about that
Yeah.
collective responsibility.
Yeah.
Is that kind of where that emphasis on relationships comes in?
Yeah, exactly. In many First Nations communities, it's common to ask, who's your mob? And it's not just small talk. It's about understanding someone's background, their family, where they fit in. Like it's the foundation of trust and respect.
So it's like asking about, someone's family history in Western context,
Yeah.
but with much deeper cultural meaning. Like it's about situating yourself within that community.
Precisely. And that leads to another like really crucial aspect of First Nations leadership, which is, being truly representational. Leaders, they can't just act on their own ideas. They carry this responsibility of representing their community, acting in line with all those cultural protocols, being mindful of boundaries.
That's a big contrast to the sort of go-getter or maverick leader we often see celebrated in Western cultures.
Yeah.
Sounds like leadership here is less about personal ambition and more about service to the community.
You got it. You hit the nail on the head. And that sense of responsibility, it's something that's earned, not just given. There's a great quote from Honor Linda Burney, MP. She says, true Aboriginal leadership is earned. When you have proven you can deal with responsibility and you understand that responsibility.
It's not just about having ideas. It's about demonstrating that commitment to the collective good, to the community, the family, country, culture. Very different measure of success.
Absolutely. And it's a responsibility that extends, well, beyond just the present moment. First Nations leaders, they consider the impact of decisions on future generations. They think 7 generations ahead, not just about what's convenient today.
Wow. That's such a contrast to quarterly earnings reports and short-term thinking that we see in, Western leadership a lot of the time.
It really is. And this long-term perspective is deeply rooted in the interconnectedness that's central to First Nations worldviews. The connection to country, to ancestors, to cultural expressions. It's all woven into the fabric of leadership.
So it's not just about making a decision, it's about understanding those decisions, ripple out through time and affect everyone connected to you.
Exactly. And that deep sense of connection, well, it fosters another crucial leadership quality, and that's listening. Not just hearing words, but truly listening, practicing Dadiri.
Okay. Deary, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this.
Yeah.
That sounds like it's like way more than just paying attention.
It is. Dr. Miriam Rose Ungan-Merbaman, she describes it beautifully. It's deep listening. Quiet awareness, understanding not just what's being said, but also what's left unsaid. It's about stillness and reflection, which, well, that's often missing in Western leadership, where it feels like it's all about talking, asserting yourself,
It makes you wonder what wisdom we miss when we're not truly listening. So we've been talking broadly about these differences. Is there a way to sort of like map them out, see the contrasting philosophies side by side?
There is. There's a table in our readings, table 4.1, that highlights like all the key distinctions and actually some interesting similarities too.
Similarities. I mean, so far it seems like pretty different worlds.
Well, both First Nations and Western leadership, recognize the need for good communication, the ability to inspire people, motivate others, being adaptable when you face challenges. Where they really differ is in those core values and their approaches.
So that whole I versus we focus that we talked about earlier.
Exactly. Western leadership, often emphasizes that individual achievement and advancement, while First Nations leadership prioritizes the collective good. And that difference plays out in how they define success, how they approach decision making, how they even perceive time.
It's like they're operating on different timelines, one focused on the immediate, the other spanning, generations. And you mentioned spirituality earlier. That's another big difference, right? In Western contexts, it's often seen as separate from work, but in First Nations leadership, it's like woven into the fabric of life, including leadership.
Yeah, it's a profound difference, and it speaks to the holistic nature of First Nations leadership, where every aspect of a person's being is considered.
So we've got these contrasting philosophies, but then within First Nations leadership, there's this idea of uh, knowing, being, doing. What does that mean, and how does that work in practice?
It's a really beautiful framework for understanding how leadership unfolds. So, knowing is about understanding your identity, where you come from, your connection to the land and community. Being is about living those values, existing in harmony with the world around you. And doing is putting that knowledge, that way of being, into action. It's your work, your relationships, your contributions to the community.
It's like this constant cycle. Your actions inform your understanding, which shapes how you exist in the world, which leads to new actions and so on.
Yeah, you got it. And this constant interplay, it's reflected in two important concepts from the Torres Strait Islander communities, Elan Kastam and Good Payson.
All right, break those down for me. What do they mean?
So Elan Kastam refers to the whole body of customs, traditions, and beliefs passed down through generations in the Torres Strait Islands. It's their cultural inheritance.
So honoring the past, but also using it to guide the future.
Exactly. And Good Payson is about living in a way that upholds those traditions. It's valuing inclusiveness, generosity, harmony within the community.
That aligns so well with the community focus we see in First Nations leadership more broadly.
Hmm.
Speaking of community, are there concrete examples of how this plays out in organizations?
Absolutely. A great example is the rise of First Nations community-controlled organizations. These are organizations designed by and for First Nations people with decision-making power resting within the community.
Can you give me a specific example? I'm having trouble picturing how that works in the real world.
Sure. A good one is ABSEC, the New South Wales Child Safety, Family and Community Peak Aboriginal Corporation. It's a nonprofit, independent organization, completely initiated, controlled, and operated by Aboriginal people. They focus on building strength and empowerment within Aboriginal communities, and their board is elected by members of the community itself. This ensures that the organization stays accountable to the people it serves and really reflects their values and priorities.
That's incredible. So it's not just about having a seat at the table. It's about like designing and building the table itself. And I imagine this model isn't limited to New South Wales, right?
You're right. Similar community-controlled organizations exist for Torres Strait Islander communities as well. For instance, you have organizations like the NTA Family and Community Services. They provide culturally appropriate support and advocacy. And there's the Torres Strait Language Center working to revitalize and preserve Torres Strait Islander languages.
It's inspiring to see how communities are taking charge and shaping their own futures.
Yeah.
But I also imagine that it creates this constant like push and pull for First Nations leaders who are navigating both worlds, their traditional cultures, and then these Western systems.
Yeah, it's what we call walking between two worlds. And it's a reality for many First Nations people as they balance, those cultural obligations with their professional lives.
Yeah.
The Minderoo Foundation's Indigenous Employment Index found that many First Nations employees prioritize connection to their community, even if it means they might not, climb the corporate ladder as quickly.
That really highlights the strength of those community ties and how different the measures of success can be.
It does. Sadly, though, the same study found a very, very low representation of First Nations people in senior leadership roles. It seems like those very qualities that make them such strong leaders, the community focus, the long-term thinking, are sometimes seen as drawbacks in, conventional Western workplaces.
It's almost like we're missing out on the incredible potential of this leadership style by trying to fit it into a mold that doesn't quite match. So what can organizations do to, bridge this gap, to truly support and empower First Nations leaders?
Well, it starts with recognizing and valuing those strengths, understanding that career paths might look different, and offering that flexibility so First Nations employees can maintain those vital community
It's
connections.
about creating a work culture that's truly inclusive and celebrates those different ways of leading.
Precisely. And that brings us back to some of the key takeaways from our deep dive into First Nations leadership so far.
Let's recap. We started by acknowledging the depth and complexity of First Nations leadership, rooted in those ancient traditions, and a holistic worldview that values connection, responsibility, and well-being of the community.
We explored how that contrasts with Western leadership styles, particularly, in the emphasis on individual achievement versus collective good, short-term versus long-term impact, and that integration of spirituality. We also touched on the powerful concepts of Didiri, Elankastam, and Good Payson, which, give us further insight into those values and practices of First Nations leadership.
And we saw those values in action through the example of those First Nations community-controlled organizations, demonstrating how those communities are, taking charge and shaping their own destinies.
But we also acknowledged the challenges faced by First Nations leaders navigating, between those worlds.
So we've covered a lot, but I have a feeling we're just scratching the surface here. Where do we go from here? What's the next step in understanding and appreciating these different approaches to leadership?
That's the exciting part, The learning never really stops. It's about keeping an open mind, Being willing to challenge our own assumptions and recognizing there's so much wisdom to be gained from these ancient practices.
So it's not necessarily about like copying First Nations leadership styles, but more about understanding those principles behind them and seeing how they might, apply in our own context.
Exactly. Maybe it's, considering that long-term impact of our decisions or, prioritizing those relationships, community well-being. Maybe it's practicing deep listening like Didiri or incorporating storytelling into how we communicate.
Those are all powerful tools. It makes you wonder, what could our workplaces, our communities, even our personal lives look like if we embrace some of these principles?
That's a great question. One worth pondering. It starts with recognizing that leadership, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing, right? There's no single right way to lead. And we can learn from all those diverse approaches.
So it's about expanding our understanding of what leadership can be. Embracing different perspectives and recognizing there's always room to grow.
Absolutely. And as we continue to learn and adapt, it's important to remember that we're not starting from scratch, There's a wealth of knowledge and experience already out there.
You're talking about the knowledge held within, First Nations communities themselves. We've got these academic readings, but how can we go beyond the books and engage with those communities in a meaningful way?
That's a crucial question. It goes beyond just reading about First Nations leadership, It's about active engagement, building those respectful relationships, learning from people with lived experience.
So it's not about, going in with all the answers, but rather coming in with a willingness to listen, to learn, and to collaborate.
Exactly. It's about understanding that unique context of each community, recognizing their sovereignty, and supporting their self-determination.
It sounds like a delicate balance, honoring tradition while also, adapting to the modern world. Are there examples of how First Nations communities are navigating this balance?
Oh, so many. Think about how First Nations artists are blending those traditional techniques with contemporary forms of expression.
Mm.
Or how communities are using technology to revitalize languages and share their stories with the world.
It's about preserving that cultural heritage while also innovating and finding new ways to, thrive.
Exactly. And that adaptability, that resilience, it's something we can all learn from.
It makes you realize that First Nations leadership isn't just about the past. It's about the present and the future. It's a living, evolving tradition.
Exactly. And as we navigate, all the complexities of our world, we can draw inspiration from that deep wisdom and resilience of First Nations leadership.
So as we kind of wrap up our deep dive today, what are some key things we should carry with us? What's the most important message for our listeners to take away?
I'd say it's this. The principles of First Nations leadership, they offer valuable insights for all of us, regardless of, our background or profession.
Whether we're leading a team, a community, or just leading our own lives.
Exactly. By embracing those values of connection, responsibility, long-term thinking, and deep listening,
Mm.
we can create a more just and sustainable future for everyone.
It's a powerful vision. And it reminds us that leadership, it's not just about, power or authority. It's about service. It's about stewardship. It's about, creating a positive impact on the world around us.
And it's a journey we embark on, together, learning from one another, honoring the past, and shaping a better future.
It's been an incredible deep dive, and I feel like we've just scratched the surface of this rich and complex topic. Is there anything else you want to leave our listeners with? Any final words of wisdom?
I would encourage everyone to, continue exploring, to seek out the voices and stories of First Nations leaders, and to reflect on how these principles might, inspire your own journey of leadership.
It's a call to action, a reminder that learning is a lifelong process, and that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable world.
And as you continue learning, remember that true understanding comes not just from reading or listening, but from respectful engagement and meaningful connection.
Thank you for guiding us through this fascinating exploration. Your insights have been invaluable.
It's been my pleasure. I hope this deep dive has sparked a desire to learn more and to embrace the wisdom of First Nations leadership.
I have no doubt it has. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this incredible journey.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep that spirit of learning alive.
It's amazing to think that, these leadership traditions have survived and thrived for so long, despite all the challenges.
Yeah, it speaks to their resilience, their adaptability, and that enduring strength of First Nations cultures.
It makes you realize, that we have so much to learn from those who have been stewards of this land for millennia.
Absolutely. There's a deep well of wisdom to tap into. And it's not just for, First Nations people, it's for all of us.
So if someone listening, wants to continue this journey of learning, where should they start? What are some resources or actions they could take?
Well, first I'd encourage, seeking out those voices of First Nations leaders themselves. There's incredible books, podcasts, articles, speeches out there.
It's about going beyond those, academic texts and hearing directly from those who are living and breathing these principles.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of, just engaging in those respectful conversations with First Nations people in your community.
It's about listening with an open mind and a willingness to learn from different perspectives.
Precisely. And as you delve deeper, you'll discover, this rich tapestry of knowledge from traditional ecological knowledge to cultural practices, to community-based leadership models.
It's like opening a door to a whole new way of seeing the world.
And who knows, it might even inspire you to rethink your own approach to leadership, right? To find ways to be more inclusive, more sustainable, more connected to the community around you.
It's a powerful invitation to step outside our comfort zones and embrace the wisdom of those who have come before us.
And to remember that journey of learning, it's never truly over. It's a lifelong process of discovery and growth.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. It's been an enlightening deep dive into the world of First Nations leadership.
It's been my pleasure. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this exploration. May it spark a curiosity to learn more and to embrace the richness and the wisdom of First Nations leadership.
We hope you'll continue to dive deep with us as we, explore more fascinating topics and uncover hidden gems of knowledge.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep that spirit of learning alive.